Facts Hunter.
This is the story of a YouTuber who made lying part of his existence. A manipulated conman who, despite being born into wealth and privilege, failed to build a prosperous career and instead became a Russian shield during one of the most destructive conflicts in Europe since the Second World War. On Friday, May the 5th, 2023, the Security Service of Ukraine, SBU, arrested dual citizen Chilean-American blogger Gonzalo Lira on charges of discrediting the highest military political leadership and the defense forces of Ukraine. Gonzalo's arrest came as a pleasant surprise for some, as he was constantly spreading pro-Russian propaganda while living in a relaxed house arrest arrangement after having been arrested a year prior under similar charges.
Vladimir Putin, he is, for all intents and purposes, what you would call an ethnic nationalist. But he is not an imperialist, the Kiev regime. I'm telling you right now. These people are neo-fascist, neo-Nazis. The West is the one puppeteering Zelensky, right? The Kiev regime also constantly shelling the regions of the Donbass. 16,000 people died after 2015 up until the start of this conflict. 1,000 children or 800 children were killed.
And while the news were pleasant for some, the same news were upsetting for others, especially his followers, who constantly claimed that he was speaking the truth just because he was living in Ukraine.
Appeared by Ukrainian Nazis in Kharkov. Remind me again why we're sending them hundreds of billions of dollars. I think he's been a very courageous man to stand out there, entertain us, and do something that was never done in history. This has never been done. The idea of having a guy out there who is truly a man of the people, not covering this from the top down, but giving his good-hearted perspective.
Polarizing to say the least, Gonzalo Lira gained notoriety after he adopted the persona of a dating coach under the name of Coach Red Pill.
Women are like dogs. Now, what do I mean? You have to treat them like you would treat a dog. Again, like I've said countless times in countless videos, see, women don't believe in objective truth. They don't, okay? For them, truth is subjective, because for them, the most important thing in their lives is not objective reality. What's the most important thing for them is feelings. Feelings which by definition are subjective. Without going into the details, you f*** a woman really well. I mean, you f*** them in a way that they will remember it. That they are going to be walking around bow-legged for a couple of days. And yeah. And what does this mean? F*** them good. It means ignoring what they want and simply taking what you want, sexually speaking. Now, I'm not advocating rape or anything like that. I am simply saying that you simply take from a woman what you want, sexually speaking, and make no apologies for it.
His popularity gained traction as a new social movement known as the manosphere became widely spread all over the world in the late 2010s. According to Google, the manosphere is an umbrella term that refers to a number of interconnected misogynistic communities. It encompasses multiple types of severity of misogyny, from broader male supremacist discourse to men's rights activists, MRA, and involuntary celibates, aka incels. These communities are made of young men who, for one reason or another, but by no fault of their own, feel attacked and unfairly treated by a society who, they feel, prioritizes the needs of other social groups over theirs, and actively seek to blame them for the lack of equality those other social groups suffer from. Unfortunately, A lot of these communities have been hijacked by opportunistic individuals who are preying on the dire need of guidance a lot of these young men require. People like Andrew Tate, Fit and Fresh, and Dan Bilzerian have millions of views in social media and who have only one goal on their minds. They don't care for the young men they attract or the dangerous narratives they promote. They only care about one thing: making money out of the desperate young men who seek solutions to the problems they suffer from. The main subject I'll be covering here is one of those opportunistic parasites, the YouTuber Gonzalo Lira, aka Coach Red Pill. Gonzalo Lira started his YouTube career as Coach Red Pill back in 2017. As part of the manosphere, his channel was aimed to young men who were seeking advice on a variety of topics, from dating advice to personal finances. Gonzalo Lira gave the impression of being a successful businessman with infinite experience, which was far from the truth. In late 2018, Coach Red Pill became involved in a YouTube drama with another YouTuber who went by the name Krauts and T. Coach Red Pill became enraged when he discovered that Krauts had Googled him and found Red Pill's real name, a task that Red Pill considered an attempt of doxing.
The YouTuber Kraut and T is planning on doxing me, to smear me, push me off the stage because he can't argue face-to-face, man-to-man. Kraut, at heart, is a coward. Doxing means, of course, revealing personal information about somebody who's online. Now, I know for a fact that he's going to dox me because he said so. He said that he's going to do a piece about me. And on different streams, he has referenced private information about me.
A claim that was questionable, as Krauts had only found Red Pill's real legal name. There can be a debate whether this was a doxing case or not. However, the question is, why did Coach Red Pill become enraged for having his real name revealed?
Oh my god, the fact that I gathered this data on Coach Red Pill is gonna bite me in the fucking ass because he knows I gathered it. Where the fuck is Jeff Holiday now? Is this Sargon telling me to stay in my place? Jeff. The data I gathered on Coach Red Pill is now being used against me. They think.
What do you mean?
That's the thing. Like the first thing he brought up. Why are you gathering private information? Like for example, on Coach Red Pill.
It's not private information.
Gonzalo lashed out at people he accused of attempting to smear him. But why such anger? Why lash out if Lira himself didn't put enough effort into hiding his identity by leaving his home address in his Patreon page and his legal name in some of his videos in the form of a copyright label with information publicly attached to his name?
Fuck that shit. Most of the shit that happened to me 7 months ago centered around Braving Ruin and this guy, who calls himself Coach Red Pill. And it is arguably this guy who is the biggest piece of shit I have ever encountered anywhere at any time. And I will show to you why. The entirety of the drama around him hinged on one accusation by him. That being that I had doxed him. That I dug up his real name by some illicit scheme and dark ways to fuck him over. The problem with that is, his real name literally was in the description of his YouTube channel. Not once, but 3 times. In his email, in his Patreon, and in the pathetic signature he leaves in the description of his channel. He ends every video with a copyright notice from a company that, if googled, leads directly to his name. He even made a video titled "In His Address." And when I happened to google that name and the company and Braving Ruin did his drama, he deleted his name and claimed they were never there. What this moron doesn't know is that I made an archive before he deleted it. He lied, and he lied for one single purpose. He lied to get attention so this fucking loser could attempt in some way to be the pathetic pathetic e-celeb that his talentless, worthless boomer ass will never be. This asshole ends every single video of his with a copyright note to a company that he claimed would never track back to him. However, it immediately leads to his name when googled. So, a compulsive liar who lies his way through this platform for the sole purpose of sucking whatever attention he can get out of anything.
Now, the question arises, why will Coach Redpill get enraged for having his name exposed to the public? Why will Coach Redpill show his face on camera and then start crying foul for having the world know that his legal name is actually Gonzalo Lira Lopez? Well, the answer can be found on his Wikipedia page. When you scroll down to the reference section, you'll see that there is a link that takes you to an archive page full of all newspapers and magazine articles. These articles are in Spanish, and apparently nobody has made a video about them until now. And boy, is there a bunch of information to talk about. By reading these old articles, I was able to build a time frame that tells the life story of Gonzalo Lira. And the story is quite interesting, as Gonzalo is an example of a wasted opportunity. So buckle up, people, because I'm gonna be taking you through what I call the deconstruction of Coach Redpill, an American parasite. Quick disclaimer, these articles were written by multiple publications at a time Gonzalo Lira thought he was building a legacy of his own. So these are his own words. Some comments can be interpreted in multiple ways, but when everything is put together, it is unavoidable to paint the portrait of a man who is opportunistic in nature and unethical to a criminal degree. Thank you for your understanding, and let's get on with the show. Gonzalo Lira was born in 1968 in Burbank, California. He was the firstborn to Gonzalo Lira Valdez, a high-end executive with a background in law and economics. During a stream, Lira claimed he was the son of a banker, but this data is hard to verify.
The thing is, the budget was incredibly irresponsible. It was an incredibly irresponsible budget. You never should have signed it. You know, apart from the political
responsible budget.
What?
I've not seen a responsible budget come out in a long fucking time.
No, that's very true.
James said the same thing. Oh, you know, fiscal irresponsibility, blah blah. But you actually bring in more tax revenue when you cut the tax rates. This is basic a priori economics.
It goes in the opposite direction after a while.
No. No.
Yes, it does.
This was no.
Sorry, buddy.
No.
You're talking to a banker's son here, okay?
Well,
it goes in the opposite direction. Okay?
Well, you said you're the banker's son. I don't know what I was supposed
I wanted
to take that
to
as.
emphasize the fact that
know,
I
I didn't
actually
expect
know
you to say
about
the
this
son of a
shit
banker
since
man.
I was like a kid.
Boy, hey, I'm the banker's son, and I know what I'm talking about, do I? I mean, look, that's how it sounded to me. Maybe you didn't mean it like that.
Gonzalo's mother, Maria Isabel Lopez Hess /Richke, quick note, in some interviews, the last name of both Gonzalo and his mother changes to Richke. I'm not sure why this is, but it could be the cause of a second marriage from the side of his mother. It is mentioned in an interview that his family was made out of lawyers and economists, and as a family, they seem to travel a lot. His family was very well off. It is mentioned in a video by the YouTube channel The Hill that Gonzalo Lira is a direct descendant of José Miguel Carrera, considered to be the first president of the independent nation of Chile.
So who is Gonzalo Lira and why is he controversial? Well, Gonzalo Lira is an American-born and mostly raised in the United States to Chilean parents. He is a direct descendant of José Miguel Carrera, the first president of Chile. He's a YouTuber who made his name in what is dubbed the manosphere, which is basically an opposition to the feminist movement. And listen, Gonzalo Lira is not somebody that I agree with on much, I have to say. Like his views on the manosphere stuff and women, I find pretty piggish, quite frankly. Also, he has some really controversial views when it comes to the Chilean government. He is, like I mentioned, a descendant of the Carrera family. That family is very prominent in Chile. Now it's the descendants are in the hundreds, and they pretty much run Chile. I mean, they're the aristocrats. So His viewpoints, they're not exactly what I don't agree with many of his.
His family is very influential, and there is a chance this might be related to the family lineage, which is said they pretty much run Chile, as they are well established throughout all major industries. So to put it plain and simple, Gonzalo Lira was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. This is also important to mention as it explains why this guy seems to be well educated. It is not because the guy is naturally clever or gifted, but because, as every high-class family, his parents press him to have a good education regardless if Gonzalo liked studying or not, which he doesn't. He's a lazy student, as I will be pointing out throughout this series of videos.
And so I'm here to tell you, you have to understand what is the point of school. It is only by understanding the objective of school that you will be able to handle school. And what is the objective of school, you might ask? Well, it's not to fucking give you an education, that's for fucking sure. You're not supposed to get an education at school. The objective of the school is to get the accreditation. All of school, elementary school, high school, college, grad school, it's all an accreditation game. That is the objective of school. Once you understand this concept, then college, high school, any educational establishment becomes easy. Because you see, the idea is not to learn. The idea is to give back to the teacher that which he wants to see so that you get the highest grade. You don't have to learn anything. You just have to give them what they want. And like I said, it's such a simple thing. Education comes from experience. Education comes from learning on your own when you're truly interested. But it's not going to come from any kind of educational establishment.
It is not fully clear, but for what we know, Gonzalo spent the first 6 years of his life growing up in California's San Fernando Valley. New York and Miami are also mentioned. Whether he traveled or moved often these first 6 years of his life is uncertain, but we do know that at age 6, his family moved back to Chile, where he spent the rest of his childhood and teen years until he moved back to America at age 22. Lira had a rough time growing up during his first years in Chile. His American accent had kids calling him Little Gringo. Gringo, for those who don't know, is a slang word used in Latin America, best translated as in someone from North America. Not a derogatory name per se, but he was definitely different from other kids. Later on his teen years, he will also be picked on for being inadequate and for carrying himself as a pompous know-it-all.
I was bullied in school a few times, especially in middle school, like around, 5th, 6th, 7th grade. Yeah, I got bullied a lot. I got bullied a lot for various reasons, partly flaws in my own character. When I was 13, 14, I was very isolated, almost ostracized as a matter of fact, because I was weird. I was very smart. I was smarter than most of the kids in my class. And, I'd gotten into reading in a big way. And I was reading stuff that was way beyond my age group, right? Partly because I was always a new kid, because my old man was this banker and we moved around a lot because of his work. And because of this, I was always like the new kid. I mean, there were a few years there between the 4th grade and 7th, 8th grade, where I went to, half a dozen different schools.
As a pompous know-it-all that will end up making a fool of himself more often than not. To such a degree, people will call him Tonto de Ganso, vaguely translated into foolish goose. This nickname stuck to him for more than one reason. First, because his name, Gonzalo, is often shortened by people to a more practical nickname, Gonzo, a word very similar to the Spanish word for goose, which is ganso, gonzo, ganso. And second, in my opinion, because of the pompous way he carried himself, making him look physically like a goose. Quick note, even today, whenever he's talking, The guy waves his hands as if he was flapping his wings every time he talks. Except today, he looks more like Danny DeVito's penguin instead of a goose. No offense to Danny DeVito. In later interviews, Lira will tell the story of how he first discovered his passion for storytelling when he was in 3rd grade. He remembers the time at school his teacher gave him the assignment of writing the memories of his latest summer vacation. Because he thought his recent vacations were boring on his own opinion, he opted to make up a story and ended up writing a fictional tale of a vacation trip that never actually happened. This assignment earned him a grade of 7 out of 10, which was pleasant to him. He continued making up stories, and years later, he sold his first story when he made a small business out of selling homework assignments to other students. Lira discovered the power of storytelling, a skill that would become profitable throughout his entire life. However, according to him, this was the moment when he decided he wanted to be a professional writer. Later in life, when he needed to choose a career, he claims he told his parents about his passion for writing, but his parents didn't saw writing as a profitable field. Side note, in later interviews, his mother would contradict this statement when she came out on the record claiming she didn't know her son had ambitions of becoming a writer, as she only found out when and after Lira wrote his first novel at age 19. After graduating from St. George College, one of the most prestigious private schools in Chile, Gonzalo's parents pressured him into attending college in pursuit of a profitable career like medicine or law. Gonzalo opted for a career in commercial engineering. Hearing this, his parents sent him to Adolfo Ibáñez, one of the top schools in Chile, where Gonzalo only lasted 1 semester, claiming it wasn't for him. Later, he tried again at University of Chile, where he was kicked out a year later due to low grades. In other words, it wasn't for him either. Years later, Gonzalo told in an interview that he failed engineering school because he was lazy and he spent all day playing pool. Yeah, sitting down to read complex textbooks about engineering tends to be hard on the brain, which might result in a side effect called laziness. Yeah, very understandable.
I was very smart. I was smarter than most of the kids in my class. And you don't have to learn anything. You just have to give them what they want.
It was during this time, the late 1980s, when Lira, a college flunky, got a job teaching English at Instituto San Marcelli. This gave him the time to write his first novel, Tomás Errázuriz, a semi-biographical tale of a cuico, a Chilean term for rich, snobbish kid, who got kicked out of school and spent an entire day meandering around Santiago de Chile because of his hesitation of returning home and face his parents along with the consequences of his shortcomings. Lira wrote the novel with the intention of making it into the Chilean version of Catcher in the Rye and Huckleberry Finn. Lira even wrote the novel with an experimental dialogue, attempting to make conversations sound similar to the local Chilean dialect, where the H is used at the end of every word, mimicking the Chilean way people talk on the streets, making the H as a silent period. This is why the title name is written as Tomás instead of Tomás, the standard Spanish pronunciation. Gonzalo tried getting his novel published, but was turned away by every local publisher, who instantly recognized Lira's lack of writing skills, as the book was full of orthographic errors. The publishing houses pointed out the reasons for rejecting the novel. They claimed the experimental writing was too distracting and the main character, Lira's effigy, was unlikable and highly opinionative. criticizing local Chilean lifestyles from a solitary, egocentric point of view. Ironically, the novel gives a glance at Lira's own disconnection from his environment. He was unable to connect with his Chilean roots because of his family's high society wealth. He is unable to connect with the average reader, who is part of the large portion of the Chilean population, which is mostly made of the middle and lower class. And he's unable to connect with the upper class too, because he was born and partially raised in America, constantly traveling to other places like New York, Miami, Guayaquil, and Ecuador. After Lira's novel was rejected from every Chilean publishing house, he made up his mind and decided to move back to America, where he attended Dartmouth College in New Hampshire, an Ivy League school with an average tuition cost of $32,000 per semester after financial aid, which I don't believe Lira qualifies for, as Gonzalo hasn't been living in America since he was 6 years and his family was well off. Dartmouth also has an acceptance rate of only 6%, which is another indication of how wealthy and well-connected the Lira family was. Apparently, Dartmouth College is the perfect place for a young man who couldn't cut it as an engineering student because he was lazy and played pool all day instead of grabbing the books and studying hard. Yep, go figure. So, in 1991, Gonzalo Lira left Chile, heading to Hanover, New Hampshire. He left as a failure. He didn't have that many friends, was kicked out of engineering school due to low grades, and his novel was rejected by every publishing house in Chile. Students from the engineering school he attended at St. George College couldn't remember much about him, other than he was very timid and an introvert. A former classmate of Lira, priest Felipe Morel, claims he knew Lira, but he wasn't a close friend of his, and that he never knew Lira had any interest in writing. However, 6 years later, Gonzalo Lira will return to Chile as an accomplished writer. And not just any writer, he will become the most famous Chilean writer, who became known as the Chilean writer of the $1 million. In fall of 1996, Chilean newspapers and entertainment magazines became aware of an inspiring story of a young 20-year-old American writer of Chilean origins that had made it big in Hollywood after his first English-written novel had been sold for an outstanding $1 million. One of the newspaper's articles points out the story sounded as if it was straight out of a fairy tale. The story was truly inspiring. A young college graduate finishes school and makes the bold decision of pursuing his dream of becoming a professional writer. He moves to Los Angeles with only $2,200 in his pocket and the determination in his heart to make it big in show business. And against all odds, he succeeds. And to the fortune of Chilean news media, the young writer will be traveling back to Chile soon, the birthplace of his parents and his former home, the country where he spent most of his childhood and teenage years. The name of the writer is Gonzalo Lira Lopez. And after being away for over 5 long years, he returns, once a failure with no friends and rejected as an aspiring writer. He comes back as the prodigal son with success under his wings and a fat check to prove it. Or so it seems. Gonzalo Lira, The Deconstruction of Coach Redpill, an American Parasite. Chapter 2, The $1 Million Writer. In late 1997, Gonzalo Lira was back in Chile, once a loner, rejected aspiring writer, now an accomplished novelist who just signed a profitable contract with an American publisher, but not just any publisher. Gonzalo Lira had signed a contract with the prestigious Putnam Publishers, the same publishing house that had produced classics like William Golding's Lord of the Flies, Norman Mailer's Deer Park, Vladimir Nabokov's Lolita, and Mario Puzo's The Godfather. Gonzalo Lira performed a series of interviews for several Chilean newspapers and magazines. The first interviews described him to have an incipiente timidez, foolishly timid, with a bit of shyness that slowly disappears as he begins to talk. Lira's attitude visibly changes as the dates of the interviews advance. At first, he seems candid with good spirits, but slowly turns presumptuous and outspoken. In the first interviews he made, Lira tells the amazing story of his life right after leaving Chile in the early 1990s. And so the tale begins. In 1991, Lira began his studies at Dartmouth College, pursuing a degree in philosophy and Russian history. Lira tells in an interview he felt lucky to have gone to Dartmouth College because he was mingling with very smart people who dedicated themselves fully to their careers. He claims that he surrounded himself with lots of people who wanted to be the best, and that rubbed off on him. In a separate article, Lira claims that going to college at Dartmouth and studying philosophy helped him think analytically and left him with the ability to spot discrepancies in any system and call them out with solid critical arguments. Lira's story turns even more magical as he tells of how, while attending Dartmouth College in 1995, just as he was about to graduate, he entered 2 papers, scripts, into a writing contest organized by the school. He claims both papers won first prize, as the judges couldn't decide which of the 2 anonymous papers was the best script, so it was a draw. Lira claims that with the prize money, he decided to move to Hollywood and pursue his dream of working in show business. And since the prize money he won at the writing competition was substantial, he could just dedicate himself to writing full-time without the need to work. After Lira graduated from school, he moved to Los Angeles and he tried to get into the movie industry, but with no luck. In a separate article, Lira claims he had a contact in Hollywood before he moved there from school, and that he had around $2,200 when he arrived to the city. Side note, 2 quick things to point out. First, this is the only time in an article he mentions he had a contact, which will be important later on. And second, the $2,200 is a contradiction to what he stated in a previous article, where he claims the prize money he won on the writing contest was substantial enough that he didn't need to work and just write full-time. These are just a few of many red flags, as there are many contradicting details in between articles. He claims he spent $1,100 in a car and paid $600 on a deposit and first month of an apartment in Culver City. The rest of the prize money went to small stuff. According to Lira, he tried writing for TV, but he got tired of the repetitive format where he had to use the same formula all the time. He claims he started writing movie scripts and that was how he was making extra money on the side, but he doubts any of his scripts will ever be made into a movie because studios tend to buy scripts that they never end up using. Lira claims that he got a job working at Disney archiving paperwork. He claims he hated that job because it was tedious and that he had to drive across town every day just to get to work. In another article, he claims he was earning $700 a week. He didn't cook, so he ate a lot of McDonald's, and he didn't socialize much. He also claims he was earning $10 an hour doing photocopies at Disney. But he had his own personal computer at work, and that on January 21st, 1996, he was sitting in front of his monitor when he came up with the idea of writing the book that later will be called Counterparts, his second novel, and according to him, he was fired from that job months later. According to Lira's time of events, he got the idea for his novel on January 21st, and he finished the first draft by August. When did he find time to write a novel that he will finish in 6 months? Maybe he was writing his novel at work, which could be the reason he got fired from his job? Okay, just more red flags. Moving on.
He seems to think that I don't have a boss. I've never had a boss. I've never punched the clock for somebody else. I've always been the boss of whatever I'm involved in. I'm the guy in everything I'm involved in. Because that's me. That's how I roll, right? Because I'm an asshole. I'm a son of a bitch. I told you guys, right?
So he finished writing his first and only draft of his novel in little over 6 months, and he was very hyped by the script. So he snail mailed letters to 60 different talent agencies asking for representation. He never mentions emails, even though he had his own desktop at Disney. He claims 9 agencies replied to his letters. He claims he mailed these 9 agents the first 3 chapters of the pre-edited draft, and from those 9 agents, 3 offered to represent him, and 1 agency wanted to beat the competition, so they offered him a contract for $1 million. The reporter points out how unbelievable his $1 million deal was, explaining that most unknown writers will have to wait a long time before a talent agency will give their draft a few minutes, let alone hours of their busy time for a careful read. This is reasonable given that these type of agents are often inundated by requests from aspiring writers from all walks of life. Some writers even have to wait months, if not years, before they are discovered. Now, just as a reminder, in another article, Lira claimed he had a contact in the industry before he moved to Los Angeles. This contact might be the reason his script was picked up by a particular agency which at the time was going through some particular business rearrangements, where they could not disclaim the amount offered to Lira. Now, he never mentions the identity of this contact, but by following some clues, it is not that hard to guess the identity of this mysterious so-called contact. I'll explain who is my primary suspect, but that will have to wait till later, as Lira has a secret from his time at Dartmouth. More of this later. Now, if you remember, dear viewer, Lira has been telling tall tales ever since he was 7 years old. So this next section really shows his natural skills for yapping BS. But I'll let you, dear viewers, be the judge of that. Lira tells the story of his novel being discovered in a very cartoonish way. He claims the agent that signed him up was Teresa Park from Sanford Greenberger Associates from New York City. He claims Park was eager to read the full unedited transcript because she had become fixated by Lira's writing style and on the story of a CIA agent and his counterpart, an axe-wielding single-mother FBI agent that for unknown reasons are trying to save a nun from a ruthless assassin. Lira claims that soon after, Stacy Creamer, the vice president of Putnam Publishers, got wind of Lira's novel. She requested the full script, which she received on a Friday. She read the entire 360 plus pages by Sunday, and without a minute to lose, rode her bicycle across Manhattan that same day to hand over the torn pager of a draft to the editor Neil Niran, who read the entire book overnight. By Monday evening, the transcript was in the hands of Putnam President Phyllis Grant, who was fascinated after reading the exciting thriller. By Tuesday morning, Putnam Publishers wanted to beat the competition by offering Lira $1 million to secure the rights of the unfinished, unedited draft that, according to some articles, was at the level of Tom Clancy's and John Grisham's novels. This interview was made a year before the book was even published in English, but Lira claims that the book was bound to be translated into Spanish for a Latin American and European consumption, and that the script was bound to be sold to a Hollywood studio for a movie adaptation. As previously mentioned, Lira claims he finished the draft of Counterparts on August, and by November he had signed up, through his agent Teresa Park, the $1 million deal with Putnam. According to Lira, after signing the contract, he moved out of his Culver City apartment, where he was paying around $325 a month, and moved to Brentwood. The article actually says where famous people like O.J. Simpson live, and according to Gonzalo's sister, Maria Elena Lira, who was 22 at the time, Lira bought a Land Rover. She claims it was a car for a lifetime. Hey, maybe this is the same one he drove to Alaska a few years later. Oh, but I'm getting ahead of myself. My bad. As previously mentioned, Gonzalo gave interviews for different magazines and newspapers, and on every occasion, Lira brings up the fact that the book that had earned him the $1 million contract was not his first novel. More than once, he brings up the fact that the first novel he wrote was Tomás Errázuriz, and the fact it had been previously rejected by all the main Chilean publishing houses back in 1991. When asked why his first novel was rejected, he claimed it was because he had no connections in the industry, meaning he had no contacts in Chile. He believes his first novel was declined to be published because in Chile, according to him, you need to know people to get your foot in the door. He claims Americans gave him a chance even though he was a nobody. This is another contradiction, as he had previously claimed that he had a contact in Hollywood when he graduated from Dartmouth, and that was a factor that helped him feel confident enough to make the move to Los Angeles. So he didn't have a contact in Chile, but he had one in American. Gonzalo's hypocrisy in all of its glory. Soon after the first article talking about Lira's $1 million deal were printed in Chile, Grijalbo, a Chilean publishing house, got in contact with Gonzalo Lira and negotiated a lucrative deal to publish Lira's first previously unpublished novel, Tomás Errázuriz. Grijalbo admitted that the amount they paid to secure Lira's novel was higher than what they usually offer to new writers, but that the book should be a sure sell among young Chilean readers who might connect with Lira's coming-of-age novel. The dollar amount paid by Grijalbo was not found in any of the articles. The book was published the same year Lira returned to Chile. Felipe Muñoz, the head of Grijalbo, said he only agreed to publish Gonzalo's novel because of Lira's American book deal. It is fair to say that the articles written about Lira's success are nothing short of a calculated PR move. Several articles proclaim that Gonzalo Lira could be the next Tom Clancy or John Grisham. In this article, Lira goes as far as to say that Hollywood studios have approached him to turn his novel counterparts into a movie, but he declined because he thinks his book is too complex to be easily adapted for the big screen. Side note, could it be possible the articles were written a year before his second book, Counterparts, was published to influence Chilean publishing houses into publishing Lira's first novel, which was published the same year the articles came out for all to read? The moment Lira's first novel was published in Chile, newspapers began publishing articles showing skepticism about Lira's $1 million book deal. Some articles were done with the reporting making inquisitive questions regarding Lira's literary education, trying to find out if Lira was a true representative of the Chilean literary circles. The month Lira's first novel was due to come out, Lira made a comment in an interview stating his novel, Tomá Errázuriz, will be polarizing not because of his experimental writing style, but because the main character and effigy of Lira's, whose name is in the main title of the novel, gives harsh criticism towards certain social groups in the Chilean society of the late 1980s. He closes the article by claiming that people who criticize his novel, Tomá Errázuriz, for having a writing style difficult to read is because they don't tolerate writing that doesn't follow the standards of Spanish literature, which is not how people speak in real life, and therefore critics are close-minded to new ways of writing. An article by Ana Maria Larraín criticizes Lira's first novel as fair and objectively as she can. She admits that one can get used to and even have fun with Lira's experimental writing style, but in the end, she claims that the unredeemable section of the book is the epilogue. She doesn't go into detail, but she calls out the author, claiming that Lira comes out as an insufferable snob, that he thinks too much of himself, and the only way to sympathize with him is if you think he's been intentionally silly, but that in the end it was a fanfarroneria. Now, if we look at this word in particular, fanfarroneria, Ana Maria uses this word to describe Tomá/Lira's effigy attitude. In Spanish, this word is an alternation of the adjective fanfarrón, which translates into the word braggart, a person who boasts about achievements or possessions. But she gives Lira the benefit of the doubt, thinking Lira is just putting up an act, not knowing this is actually Gonzalo's being himself. But she is merciful and ends by claiming he has potential as a writer. Another article points out the language is unauthentic, boring, and distracting from the main story. The narration is painfully slow, with long pauses trying to explain eccentric behaviors from the characters. This book was rejected for good reasons: an unlikable character, a boring story, and a difficult dialect to read that distracts from the events in the story. And the only reason it was published 7 years after it was initially rejected is because of Gonzalo's $1 million PR stunt. Under this new line of questioning, Lira began acting more defensively with every article that came out after Tomá Errázuriz was released in Chile at the end of 1997, especially because reviews panning Lira's first novel began to come out, and more critics, especially accomplished Chilean writers with credentials of undeniable legitimacy, began to question the possibility that an unknown writer with no previously published works of high quality will have what it takes for a publishing company to take a $1 million gamble in a book that might not sell enough copies to make a profit. To clarify the nature of the mistrust Gonzalo Lira's $1 million book deal, we take a look at an article published in a Spanish-language publication called ¿Qué pasa?, which explains that usually a publishing house will advance only 10% of the cost of every book sold, meaning that in order for Lira to receive $1 million, the book will have to be good enough to guarantee to sell at least 500,000 hardcover book copies, which will sell at around $20 each. For comparison, Tom Clancy's first novel, The Hunt for the Red October, sold 45,000 copies after an extensive marketing campaign. The book eventually sold 365,000 copies after it received an endorsement from President Reagan, and it sold 4.3 million copies after it was released in paperback edition that usually sells at half the price of a hardcover. In other words, is it possible that Lira's book was good enough to receive a presidential endorsement in order to have the same success that Tom Clancy's first novel had? Well, in order for us to find out how good this book is, I am sharing a review by the YouTube channel SLB Productions. If you haven't had a chance, please go check out his 2 videos about Gonzalo Lira. They are criminally underviewed in my opinion.
In 1997, Lira released a book entitled Counterparts, making his first public debut as an author. And for this documentary, I went ahead and ordered the books off of Amazon. The endeavor would cost me about $12, $2 for the books, and about $10 in shipping. When you read Lira's books, you will immediately notice his unconventional writing style. He either unknowingly or intentionally uses improper sentence structure. The book is full of run-on sentences, with some paragraphs being composed of almost one entire sentence. He uses colons frequently, and they often seem inappropriate, interrupting the flow of the novel. My girlfriend, who I gave the second novel to read, noted that having an unconventional writing style is not necessarily a bad thing if it doesn't distract you from the narrative, but this is not one of those cases. Too often, you will almost be taken aback by some of the silly choices Coach uses in his novel. There are points when reading Coach's novel when I have to question myself whether I believe that he is simply a lazy writer or if he genuinely believes that this is clever poetics. For example, on page 14 of Coach's book, we have this lovely gem. With that, Chris Holm dragged the axe blade across the concrete. The sound like an axe blade edge being dragged across concrete. I don't understand why he would attempt to even use a metaphor if he couldn't think of one. Is this supposed to be some kind of ironic writing? When you read it, it sounds strange. I believe he should have put was between sound and like. The sound was like an axe blade being dragged across concrete. This is part of Coach's problem, is that he writes in the past tense and presence in the same sentences. It has an uncomfortable rhythm. Gonzalo will spend enough time detailing the motivations of his characters but fail to describe their physical appearances, and rarely does he ever describe the environments in which these characters occupy. This makes it very difficult to establish a setting in your mind when reading the novels. The lack of a concrete setting in your mind makes it jarring when you realize the characters have traveled from one location to the next, with little to no indication. After a few chapters in, my girlfriend and I both came to the same conclusion that his books read like movie scripts and not like a work of literature. One of his characters in his first novel seems to be some kind of idealized self-insert. A young CIA agent who is very intelligent and has all the ladies in the office crushing on him, but is also a vindictive man who takes pride in his ability to destroy people who fuck with him. This person also happens to be a Dartmouth graduate who writes novels. Coach uses gratuitous violence, shallow character cliches, and over-the-top dialogue rife with edgy use of the word fuck, which, if I take the books from the perspective of being a serious crime thriller, it fails on its face. But if I imagine it from the angle of a violent, edgy anime, it's a pretty entertaining read. Gonzalo's novels are not the worst thing that I've ever read, and can manage to be entertaining during some chapters, but desperately could use an editor to work with the glaring quirks of Lira's writing. This is actually not an indictment of his writing talent, and maybe the only thing he comes close to actually having some credentials, but he is a corny writer. He can make a great script for a Kingsman movie, but this over-the-top action-orientated style would be responsible for his failure in a future endeavor. Some of the other reviewers on the site were not as impressed with Lira's work. Disclaimer, I couldn't make it past the first page of Look Inside. Someone remarked about another one of this guy's books that they were the literary equivalent of an Ed Wood film. As historically bad as Wood's films were, I don't think he deserves to be insulted by that comparison. As to my disclaimer, the novel starts with a scene at a locale that I am very familiar with. Gonzalo Lira, or whatever the hell his name is, fails miserably to give the reader any sense of whatsoever about the sights, the sounds of the subway platform at Times Square station on 42nd Street. Perhaps that can be overlooked, but there is an improper use of a word in the first paragraph that suggested to me either one of three possibilities. English was not the author's first language, St. Martin's Press could not possibly have published this book, or someone on the editorial staff just said, screw it.
Yeah, I don't see any presidential endorsement material in Lira's books, tell you the truth. Lira began to push back against criticism, which started to turn bolder as it became apparent that he didn't have literary training in either English or Spanish. He had a bachelor's in arts, but it was in Russian history and philosophy, and with only 2 books released, it was apparent Lira's book wasn't getting on the New York Times bestsellers list anytime soon.
And so I'm here to tell you, you have to understand what is the point of school. It is only by understanding the objective of school that you will be able to handle school. You will be able to handle school and get good grades and have a good time if you understand what is the objective of school. And what is the objective of school, you might ask? Well, it's not to fucking give you an education, that's for fucking sure. You're not supposed to get an education at school. The objective of school is to get the accreditation for your future. The accreditation you will need to go to med school or law school or whatever, to get the accreditation so some employer in the future will look at you and say, yes, you are qualified to do the job that I need somebody to do. All of school, elementary school, high school, college, grad school, it's all an accreditation game. That is the objective of school. Once you understand this concept, then college, high school, any educational establishment becomes easy. Because you see, the idea is not to learn. The idea is to give back to the teacher that which he wants to see so that you get the highest grade. You don't have to learn anything. You just have to give them what they want. And like I said, it's such a simple thing. Education comes from experience. Education comes from learning on your own when you're truly interested. But it's not going to come from any kind of educational establishment.
Lira slowly began to turn more outspoken. The fact is, Lira has never taken any high-level literature or advanced writing classes in his life, and his writing shows. With this defensive attitude, he was starting to get under people's skin for bashing the ethics of the Chilean and Latin American literature circles, who started seeding doubts about the veracity of Lira's $1 million American book deal, which was the reason Lira had become the center of their conversations. These interviews slowly wore down Gonzalo, and his high culture facade began to fall apart. He claims that in Chile, it is hard to become a successful writer because there is an unwritten rule where everybody has to meet a certain level of mediocrity, and that if you ever dare to write something legitimately good, you'll be ostracized. In this same article, he claims he wrote a thriller, Counterparts, but that he doesn't read thrillers that much because he finds them boring. He claims it's because once he reads the first 10 pages, he can predict who the secret villain is and even how the book will end. In a separate article, Lira claims he wrote Counterparts as a mixture between pleasure and violence, and that the most entertaining material he likes to write is melodrama, action, violence, and pornography. He also claims that writing is the easiest job he ever had. that he doesn't know why there aren't more people writing for a living. That writing a plot is easy and that writing 400 pages a week is so easy any dumbass can do it. M. Fuentealba, the reporter who wrote the article, asked Gonzalo about the last part of his statement. Is that what you call art? Lira responds with, I don't like to talk about art because it's difficult to define. He's confessed that he writes novels because he has ambitions and he wants to test the limits of what he can write. In a final interview before Lira returned to America, Gonzalo, the foolish goose, gave the middle finger to the literary Chilean circles, but not only that, he straight out confesses that he had no real training as a writer. In an article written by Jimena Poe, published in January 1998, Lira claims that writers in Chile need to take more chances. He claims people write the same book others have written before, instead of writing something new and original. This, by the way, from the guy who admits he wanted to write the Chilean version of Catcher in the Rye and Huckleberry Finn. Jimena Poe asked Lira if young writers in America are different from Chilean writers. Lira claims they have the same problems, except that in America, writers are motivated by money incentives or because they want to get their foot in the door of a big university where they can get a job teaching. Lira claims that in America, writers have to follow an unofficial set of rules where they have to write with center-left political leaning ideas in order to be published. Side note, this statement makes absolutely no sense. Surely he wouldn't have been paid $1 million if he is a right-wing writer. Also, Tom Clancy's books were endorsed by Reagan, President right-wing Reagan, and Clancy's novels were being adapted to the big screen, and even video games, all over the 1990s, making big bucks and maintaining an open market for that type of material. Lira also claims that all books in America are required to be written with only one point of view, because writing with multiple viewpoints will go against what Henry James has dictated. Side note, this is a bunch of crap. If this was true, J.R.R. Martin wouldn't have been able to write his Game of Thrones book series, a series where the story is told through many characters' points of views. Lira claims that he wrote Counterparts with the intention of being original and that he wrote it with no intention of making a commercial novel, but a novel with surprising nuance. Lira also claims that people criticizes his work by claiming Lira doesn't know how to write. The reporter reminds Lira that his book Counterparts hasn't come out in Chile yet, insinuating that he didn't know why Lira will make such claims, especially since Lira swears that his first novel was declined because he didn't have any contacts and not because it wasn't well written. Lira is then asked what was his opinion about José Donoso, the writer named the father of Chilean literature. Lira then responds he has no opinions because he hasn't read any of his books. So Lira goes around giving his opinion about Chilean writers without even reading the books of the most famous writer in Chilean literature.
See, when I was 13, 14, I was very isolated, almost ostracized, as a matter of fact, because I was weird. I was very smart. I was smarter than most of the kids in my class. And, I'd gotten into reading in a big way. And I was reading stuff that was way beyond my age group, right?
He also admits that he reads books about writing techniques, showing how he's never attended a literature or high-level writing class at school and that he uses gimmicks to write books for a profit and not for art. So if this guy doesn't read literature, where does he get off criticizing both American and Chilean literature circles? Lira admits he doesn't want to study film or literature because it's a waste of time, because the people who teaches those classes don't have a clue of what they are talking about. And there you have it, folks. Gonzalo Lira Lopez, the same guy who admits to being a tall tale storyteller since the age of 7, publicly admits that he is a professional writer because it is the easiest job in the world. A writer that has never taken a writing class because, in his own words, they are a waste of time. A critic of literature who doesn't like to study or read literature because that is art, and art is hard to define. A first-time writer that scored a $1 million book deal for a novel that was a mixture between pleasure and violence, and that his most entertaining material to write is melodrama, action, violence, and pornography. Which brings us to the questions. 1. Did Putnam really pay $1 million in advance to an amateur pulp fiction novelist for a book that will probably never sell 500,000 copies because the market for violence and pornography is too close of a niche and will probably never be made into a major motion picture for the same reason? And the next question is 2. Was Lira's contact in the industry the same reason why he was published in America in the first place? Because in his own words, he's just an amateur writer because he doesn't like to take writing classes. In order to answer these questions, we have to reveal a few facts that Lira didn't tell in his interviews. To start, Lira claims he felt very lucky for attending Dartmouth College, claiming he surrounded himself with very smart, ambitious people who wanted to succeed. What he failed to reveal was that he was a loner and still a lazy student during his time attending school in New Hampshire. See, Gonzalo Lira was involved in an incident during his freshman year at Dartmouth. The nature of the incident is not certain, and according to Lira, he was unfairly accused of harassment by a female student. But we all know that Lira is a confident, tall-tale storyteller. However, if we visit Dartmouth College's website, we'll find an article written by Lira himself the year before his graduation, titled My Education at Dartmouth. Now, one thing for sure, Lira might not be a trained writer, but he did put some passion into this article, and boy is it a juicy one. Let me tell you folks, he does like writing melodrama for sure.
Next June, I will graduate from Dartmouth College. I used to think that classrooms were where I would learn and grow, but the closer I get to commencement day, the more I realize that my fellow students are the ones who have provided me with my real education. And it's an education I never expected, an education in hypocrisy. My freshman fall, I was accused of sexual assault and harassment by another freshman. I was brought before the Committee on Standards, and though there was proof that I did not harass the woman in question, and more than a reasonable doubt as to whether I assaulted her, I was suspended for 3 terms by the cause, having been found innocent of harassment but guilty of assault. The issue of guilt or innocence is immaterial now. All of this happened over 3 years ago, and nothing will change the fact that I was suspended and missed out on my freshman year. The effects of that suspension, however, are something interesting to think about. Our relationships with students, professors, and administrators have inevitably been shaded by my suspension, what they think about me, how they react to me, how they treat me, and what they say about me. I'm about to graduate. Yes, even though I was suspended for 3 terms, I will still manage to graduate with the class I matriculated with, the class of 1995. Now that my graduation is so near, I've been thinking long, and hard about what it has all meant, trying to come up with an understanding of the events of my college career. And more than anything else, the one thing that's become glaringly apparent is the hypocrisy of so many of the people here at Dartmouth. People always say that convicted criminals should be given a second chance once they have paid their debt to society. The more compassionate members of the Dartmouth community are wont to say this when, for instance, a murderer in some faraway place finishes his prison term and goes free. But how genuine is this sentiment? How real is this belief? Not very. I was suspended, and whether or not I did what I am accused of having done is not important. I served out my punishment. I did my 3 terms. I paid my debt to the Dartmouth Society. Was I accepted back into the fold? In a word, no. Fairly ugly rumors about me were spread around. People could never quite make it to lunch with me, busy with exams, papers, sports, anything. Somehow, my name never quite made it to the party blitz lists, and for a long time my phone sat mostly idle. When I did get a call, I could bet that it was a wrong number before I picked it up. But that's life. To paraphrase Faulkner, I endured. I went to classes, studied, and generally did what I had wanted to do when I came here. I got an education. But now that I look back on my Dartmouth career, I realize that the education I received was fuller than I had anticipated. It was lonely, yes, but I can take loneliness. And what I could never take is hypocrisy. Dartmouth taught me plenty about hypocrisy. The people of this campus who show the most compassion were, curiously enough, the ones least likely to listen to me or to accept me in any way. Many of them actively avoided me, though I'd never spoken to them. These people with good liberal arts values would look at me askance, aloof, their eyes wondering when I would crawl back under the rock I'd come out from under. Some of them even questioned the people who had the nerve to hang out with me. But that's okay. This sounds weird, I'm sure, but you get to a point where you don't care much about being despised. You get to a point where you don't mind that people avoid you on the street. You get to the point where you think it's the natural state of affairs, and in fact it is. I am ostracized, and I find, surprisingly, that it doesn't hurt that much. Not only can I take it, but I can live and work and study, and not really feel hurt by the ostracism I encounter. I don't even feel it. But what does hurt me is that, though the fact of my suspension is nearly common knowledge, in over 3 years at Dartmouth only one student asked me to my face about my suspension. Only one. And that student was a transfer student. Everywhere, all day, I hear calls to listen to what someone has to say. I hear calls to reach out, to try to understand others, to try to empathize with their problems. But no one reached out to me except for that one transfer. When someone says one thing and does another, they call that hypocrisy. That's what I've seen here at Dartmouth. I see everyone reaching out to romantic causes. It's easy to reach out to someone with AIDS, or to some sculptor who is under attack for having exhibited a picture of Christ submerged in a pool of urine. It's easy, and let's be honest here, it's fun to support causes where everyone agrees, where everyone is showing support. Homophobes, racists, sexists, elitists, let's get in. Yes, it's fun and easy to be a part of Peter Pan's gang, flinging your slings and arrows at some bad old, distant, maybe even illusory Captain Hook. But when they come face to face with someone they say they ought to reach out to, and at least try to understand, the people of the Dartmouth community run away. I met a woman once. We met in a tube room. We talked. We had a good time. We hung out a couple of times after that. We had a lot in common. She seemed like a decent, cool person, someone I'd like as a friend. Then I stopped hearing from her. I blitzed her a couple of times, inviting her to lunch, to hang out, whatever, but I got no answer. I assumed she'd heard about my suspension, and I was right. I happened to see her on the street one day, and this is what she did. She studiously went around me, crossing the street to avoid me, and then crossing back again, looking at the sidewalk, not approaching me, furtively glancing at me to make sure I hadn't spotted her, looking relieved when she was out of range, safely past me. That's the image of Dartmouth that I'll carry with me to the end of my days, a coward who didn't have the courage of her convictions. She had the courage to reach out to nameless others she'd never seen, but not so much courage as to reach out to someone she knew. She didn't even have the courage to at least ask. Vox clamentis in deserto indeed. My education at Dartmouth is nearly complete.
Over the years, lots of people have called me a bastard. And to tell you the truth, I'm proud of it. Yeah, because what is a bastard in this sense? I'm not talking about an illegitimate child, of course. I'm talking about the colloquialism of calling somebody a bastard. Sometimes he's called an asshole, sometimes he's called whatever. It's derogatory, it's trying to put the guy down, and it is usually shot through with a sense of resentment and envy. And that is pretty much key to the issue of what it is to be a bastard. Simply put, a bastard is a guy who gets what he wants and is willing to inflict hurt feelings on others in order to get what he wants. Sometimes those hurt feelings can be really, really bad hurt feelings, and sometimes a bastard is willing to inflict actual harm on others in order to get what he wants.
Gonzalo's hypocrisy in all of its glory. And I posted a link to Lira's letter in the notes below, so you can read it in full if you like. Okay, now a few things for sure. Gonzalo Lira was convicted of assault. Whether it was sexual in nature is hard to tell. I take it he would have been arrested if he did sexually assaulted a female freshman classmate and probably even expelled. But the key facts, and the ones I do have to emphasize, are 1. Lira remained a loner at Dartmouth, and 2. He admits he was still a lazy student. So, if Gonzalo Lira didn't have friends at Dartmouth, who was his Hollywood contact? And one important thing I have to mention, looking at Dartmouth's website, we find that Lira never wrote anything about the contest where he won first place twice at the same time after submitting 2 papers that were so good the judges gave him double the prize, which was so substantial he could decide not to work, and there is no way it was the $2,200 he claims he used for a car and an apartment in Culver City. I do believe that Lira got the contract with Putnam because of his contact, and I strongly believe his contact was his influential family. See, in 1996, the same year Lira signed his contract with Putnam, Putnam was in the process of being purchased by Penguin Group for $336 million. As a matter of fact, Lira claims he signed the contract in November. Penguin acquired Putnam in December, the exact following month. I believe Lira's family was influential enough to prevent his expulsion from Dartmouth, and influential enough to have Putnam sign a contract with Gonzalo. It might not have been a $1 million contract, but Gonzalo was free to make up the lie because Putnam had a policy of not disclaiming the amount they pay when they sign up new writers. Now imagine what if Penguin Group were to find out Putnam is paying $1 million to a novice writer who writes pulp fiction novels full of melodrama, action, violence, and pornography for fun. They probably would have paid less than the $366 million they ended up paying, even though Putnam had sales of $276 million at the time of acquisition. Now, by this time, there is a chance that there might be a small minority of viewers willing to give Gonzalo a break and think that the $1 million contract may have actually happened, or that maybe he is a legitimate writer who is misunderstood, because writing violence and pornography can be considered art, like the novel A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess, which has plenty of both and was eventually adapted into a good movie. And I understand. I have sympathy for people who are ostracized by society, and I also feel compassion for people who want to become professional writers by their own merits and not following society's unwritten rules. However, Gonzalo the Lying Goose, doesn't deserve compassion or understanding. Why is this? Because, dear viewer, in the interview published in 1997 in El Mercurio magazine, Gonzalo had already admitted he wanted to become a writer because otherwise he would have to go back to school and study a university career. In other words, for him, writing is so easy it doesn't qualify as a university career. In the interview he made in July 1997, he admitted he wanted to become a movie director, but he didn't watch many movies because he spent most of his time watching TV and playing squash. He also said he was working on his next 2 books, a book about Chile called TKG that most likely will be 1,500 pages long. At the time of the interview, Lira admits he has been working on the book for over 6 years, but that he only has 120 pages done so far. He claimed he was also working on a book called The Dream Police, and is a book bound to come out in 1999. None of these books were ever materialized. Also, in 2002, almost 6 years after his first novel was signed by Putnam, Gonzalo gave an interview for the Chilean newspaper called La Tercera. He was promoting his second English-written novel titled Acrobat. In this interview, he admits that he doesn't like to give as many interviews as he once did back in 1997. His argument was that too many people thought he was choro, which means cool in Chilean social circles. So he started believing his own hype and felt like he was walking on clouds. So this time he wants to be more grounded. This interview also explains that Gonzalo had signed a contract for 2 books, and not just one, as initially stated in multiple articles 6 years earlier. This is a major piece of information that he not revealed back in 1996 and 97. You think this would have come out while telling those tall tale stories about the excited publishers who rode their bicycles across New York in urgency just to deliver the draft of his novel, or while claiming that one of the publishing agents was eagerly reading the draft 1 page at a time while Gonzalo was faxing the entire 400 pages in real time. Before the end of the article, Andres Gomez Bravo, the reporter who wrote the interview, asked Gonzalo if the story about the $1 million deal for his book Counterparts actually happened. To this, Gonzalo answers that he will not confirm or decline if it really actually happened. But he does go on the record claiming that he has been generously compensated for his work and that he feels lucky because of it. Of course, this is the same article where moments earlier Gonzalo was boldly claiming to have written very realistic novels about CIA operatives because, according to him, for 10 years during the 80s, Gonzalo had been working as a secret CIA agent while living in Chile. Yep, who could possibly doubt Gonzalo's word? Gonzalo Lira Lopez, the man who never wrote another novel again in Chile after being panned by critics and the Chilean literary circles. The man who once claimed back in an interview in 1997 that Tomás Errázuriz, his first novel, had sold well, but it was not well received by critics. Lira claimed back in that article that he didn't care about the critics because his career is just getting started and that is not a sprint, but a marathon. Gonzalo ends by stating with lots of confidence, quote, "We'll talk again in 20 years, end of quote. Well, more than 20 years have passed, and we can all see how his career as a professional writer is coming along. When Lira went back to America, it is uncertain how long he lived in his new place at Brentwood. But it mustn't have been for long, because we found out in an article written in 2003 that he had moved from Los Angeles to New York, where he lived until he decided to move back to Chile for a second time, and according to him, the final time. Oh, but Lira wasn't just thinking on going back to Chile just to grow old. No, he had big plans. Once he was known as the $1 million writer. Now he wanted to be known as the man who brought Hollywood to Chile, the man who created Chilewood. Well, people, thank you for watching till the end of the video. If you like what you saw, please help the channel grow by clicking a like and a subscribe. This is the Facts Hunter. Thanks again, bye for now, and take care.